We're just going to do one paragraph today on page 213. And on page 213 in the Kuzari, this will conclude our discussion of Shabbos observance. We had spent the last couple of weeks talking about how both Yom Tov, Shabbos, and Shemitah, I should say all three, Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Shemitah, all reflect upon the event of the Exodus and of the creation. It's important to emphasize both as two historical events that are the cornerstone of our faith. Judaism always emphasizes the mitzvah of Zachor. Remember, remember, remember. And the only way, especially for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, that we can reaffirm our faith is through remembering. There are different approaches to affirmations of faith. But for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the most important way that we reaffirm our faith is through remembering these two events, creation and the Exodus/Matan Torah episode, because those two events reflect upon Hashem, His existence, His omnipotence, and the fact that He chose us as His people. Now, of course, a person has other ways of affirming faith. You can look at the world around you. You can look at a snowflake on your way out before you press down your boot on the snow. And you can look at a snowflake and hold it under a magnifying glass and find God in a snowflake. But for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the intellect is a very fickle tool. Sometimes you'll be able to use it to find God, and sometimes you'll be able to use it to reject God. But when you use the faculty of memory, the collective national memory of the Jewish people, you can never go wrong. Your memory of Zachor, of remember creation, remember Matan Torah, that's something that will never fail you, or at least, I shouldn't say never, but it's certainly less likely to fail you than using your intellect and your investigation of creation all around you. Now, of course you know that there's different attitudes towards this, different emphases. For the Rambam, the emphasis on Bechina, of looking out in the world around you to find God, is equally as important as it is to Zachor, to remember. But for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, it's not. This is part of his polemic against the world of philosophy that is circulating around him, which, because the philosopher says, I can come to ultimate truths through my intellect and through investigation of the world around me. For Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, it's not based on what I as an individual can discover, but rather what my nationhood has in its collective past is what is the basis and foundation of everything that I believe. So that's an important idea, and I want to finish with this idea of Shabbos observance as being the cornerstone of faith. And you heard that right. It's not just the mitzvah of Zachor as a mental exercise, but it's the very observance of Shabbos that is the affirmation of faith. Now, the question is, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Does my remembrance and my affirmation of my faith cause me to observe Shabbos? Or does my observance of Shabbos bring about an affirmation of my faith? If you look at Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in this paragraph, you'll see something that at face value is counterintuitive. Let's take a look. He says at the top of page 213, Shabbos observance, therefore, is inherently an affirmation of God. Further, because remember what we said is that when a person observes Shabbos, he's affirming that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Further, it affirms the creation of the universe. For one who accepts the commandment of the Shabbos with the intention that the seventh day marked the end of creation has without a doubt affirmed his belief in an ex nihilo creation, a creation of something out of nothing. Now, there's something very curious in the Hebrew over here that I just happened to discover by coincidence. There are 3 words in the Hebrew that where the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says, Ki mi shemekabel mitzvat Shabbat, someone who accepts upon himself the mitzvah of Shabbos, ba'avur Shabbat haya kelot ma'aseh bereshit, with the intent that Shabbos represents the conclusion of the act of creation, kevar hoda b'chidush. Such a person is affirming or is acknowledging a creation out of nothing, a creation that started out of nothing, creation ex nihilo, mibali safek, undoubtedly. Those three words, kavar hoda v'chidush, are also used by the Ramban, and we learned this Ramban together. The Ramban in Parshas Bo. Just a couple of weeks ago, we studied this Ramban together, and I'll just read for you that line that the Ramban says. Now, the Ramban lives a century after Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. I don't believe that the Ramban ever, and I could be mistaken about this, but in thinking about the Ramban's citations, I don't believe he ever quotes Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the Kuzari directly. There are others who do quote Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. The Ibn Ezra quotes Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, but I don't believe that the Ramban ever does, and I could be mistaken, I'll have to go back. But the Ramban uses the exact same words in talking about many mitzvot that are commemorative of Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. And he writes, there are mitzvot rabot zecher liyetzias Mitzrayim. He says, there are many mitzvahs that remind us of the Exodus. And he says, ki hakona mezuzah bezuz echad, because if a person purchases a mezuzah with one zuz, with one little coin, like the Zabin Abba Bitre Zuze, like a zuz is an insignificant coin, it's an insignificant amount of money. The kava bepischa, and he puts that mezuzah on his door, the niskavin b'inyana, and he thinks about what he's doing, he thinks about what this mezuzah represents, kevar hoda b'chidush ha'olam. That person has immediately acknowledged the act of creation, uv'yidiyat haborei v'hashkachato, and a knowledge of God, or that God is omniscient and that God is providential. So he uses the exact same language. It's possible that it's a coincidence, but it's also very possible that the Ramban was giving a hat tip to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as being the one from whom he draws this inspiration. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is talking about Shabbos observance, that just doing the mitzvah itself, the action of doing the mitzvah, when it's accompanied by proper thought and acknowledgement, I realize what I'm doing. When I light the Shabbos candles, I'm actually not just accepting not to do malacha anymore. That's really the secondary thought that a person is supposed to have. When I'm lighting the Shabbos candles, I'm hereby acknowledging that I'm emulating my Creator who rested on this day after a full 6 days of exhausting work. And so it really does take a certain mental state, which is why it's not good to go into Shabbos in a crazy way, right? When I light those Shabbos candles, when I'm accepting Shabbos, what I'm supposed to be thinking of is, I know what I'm doing. I understand now. I have this idea now. Shabbos candles, I'm actually doing something that God did a long time ago when He created the world. And He created the world from nothing, and now He rested after His act of creation. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says, that this action itself is a faith-affirming action. He says, in turn, one who has affirmed the creation has also thereby affirmed the blessed Creator. So it really is two things. When you observe Shabbos, you're affirming God, and you're affirming creation. When you affirm creation, you're affirming God. On the other hand, one who has not accepted the Shabbos will fall into a state of doubt as to the origin of the universe, and his faith will be imperfectly channeled to the Creator. Shabbos observance then brings one closer to the Creator than asceticism and abstinence. Okay, so what he's telling us is, and this last sentence is really the kicker. You strengthen your emunah, you strengthen your belief in God more through Shabbos observance, through lighting those candles, through making kiddush, through having a lovely meal with family and friends, through singing zemiros. That strengthens your emunah more than living the life of a hermit, living in a monastery, living in, going to the Dalai Lama and living in a cave or whatever it is. Living this kind of fulfilling Shabbos in all of its splendor, in all of its joy, in all of its beauty, right, is a greater faith affirmer than abstaining from the pleasures of this world. And that's really what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had started with, because the whole question of the Kuzari is that if you people want to become closer to God, shouldn't asceticism and abstinence be the course by eschewing the pleasures of this world that will bring you to a holier place? And he says, no. We believe in doing actions, and the actions themselves are the affirmations of our faith. It's therefore not the abstinence from the physical that affirms our faith in God, but rather doing things in the physical world, because since we are physical beings, we are affected by things that we do, as the Ramban also had said, and therefore, whatever we do in the course of observing Shabbos, as long as we are conscious of why we're doing what we're doing, are the greatest faith affirmations. And in the footnote I point out something, that this is a cause and effect. It's not that my belief in God causes me to observe Shabbos. It's that my observance of Shabbos causes me to further and further believe in God. It's somewhat counterintuitive, because one would think that the more emunah I have, the more strongly I will hold on to this observance of Shabbos. But just the opposite is true. The more that I observe Shabbos, the more that I will believe in God. And the stronger that I adhere, both physically and mentally, to an observance of Shabbos, the stronger my faith will become. And the Kol Yehuda, one of the classic commentaries on the Kuzari, says that it works in two ways. Number one, as the Rambam himself writes, that if you have a concept in your mind that you don't reinforce with physical action, that belief erodes over time. If I can just give you a very mundane example of this, if I know intellectually that I have to take care of myself physically, I have to work out, I have to exercise, I have to eat right. We all know that's true, right? But what if after we have that very strong inspiration and affirmation of the need for physical fitness and taking care of ourselves, we then go to the ice cream shop afterwards, and we have a nice ice cream cone. And then instead of going to the gym, we end up going to watch a movie or something else, right? So that faith affirmation dissipates into the ether. Whatever you believe in will dissipate unless you harness that belief and do something physically with that action to affirm it. So it's not enough just to affirm the importance of physical fitness. Once you affirm the importance of physical fitness, you've got to start a regimen of physical exercise. Right? And the same thing is true with faith affirmations. It's insufficient to go to a class about about chesed or about kindness, unless you actually put it into practice. The importance of kindness, the importance of helping other people will dissipate into the ether until you actually put it into practice and you start feeding those who have no food. Yes?
But I feel like so many mitzvahs fall into this category. It's not just mainly Shabbos, although, I appreciate the plug for Shabbos, but when I'm thinking about what I did this morning, you go to the bathroom, you say Asher Yatzar, and you're reaffirming that God created you, and He's still in the present, making sure your body works perfectly. You eat something, you're affirming that God created this food, and He's allowing you to
by
partake
making
of
the
it.
bracha. Right.
Like everything you do, if you think about it, is doing what you just described.
Correct. Shabbos has the highest potency for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, because it's all about the Creator of heaven and earth. That's what Shabbos is a testament to. Everything that I do on Shabbos is a testament to a Creator, not just the God who's there for me, but a Creator. So it's an all-encompassing sort of heightens that emunah even more than anything else in the specific.
But it also says, I remember my daughters, they used to say that every time that we doing a mitzvah, we are creating an angel, right?
Yes. That's also true. Right. But here we're talking about the emunah that we generate through the performance of a mitzvah.
Is that true? I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Yes. Hannah.
Hannah just said, isn't that from that movie? An angel gets its wings every time he does something.
I didn't see that movie.
It's so wonderful.
Is that true?
Yeah, of course. Praklit. Yeah, the Chazal say that.
If you do
Every mitzvah you do, you're kona praklit
la.
la'atzmo. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, you're kona, an advocate, an advocating spiritual entity. It doesn't necessarily have his name Clarence and have wings, but movie trivia. Yes, we could spend the whole day on that. Okay. And I was looking at some of the zemiras that we say on Shabbos, and I was thinking to myself, there's a very interesting, the zemiras that we say on Shabbos, really there should be a whole series of classes on the zemiros of Shabbos. Because first of all, it's one of the integral components of our Shabbos meal. Do you know why we sing zemiros on Shabbos? I'm going to tell you one of the main reasons why we sing zemiros on Shabbos. It's because your Shabbos table has to have divrei Torah. And think about all of those Shabbos meals that you've had that have been devoid of a Devar Torah. Now, it's not necessarily every Shabbos. I'm sure there are many Shabbatot when you have someone who's very sincere and very erudite who wants to say a Devar Torah. But think about all of those Shabbos meals that have been absent of a Devar Torah. When you sing Zemirot at the Shabbos table, you're immediately infusing your Shabbos table with Divrei Torah. And that's why it's important to have at least one Zemer every Shabbat, at every Shabbos meal, so that you at least are making sure that your Shabbos table has had some Kedusha on it. Okay? It hasn't just been about the Kugel, it's been about the Torah as well. That's reason number one, and that's sort of like the minimal reason why to have Zemiros. But the Zemiros themselves actually add to the enjoyment, if you enjoy music. Some people have no affinity for music at all. They don't have an ear, so then recite poetry instead. But if you have an affinity for music and the people can carry a tune, I've heard some people singing Zemiros, and I've wished I could take a nap early and have Shabbos enjoyment some other way. But for those who can carry a tune, Zemiros can be a beautiful thing with the harmonies and everything like that, and that only adds to the oneg, to the pleasure of Shabbos. But the third thing is that the Zemiros themselves are part of our faith affirmations of what Shabbos is all about. If you look at some of the words, it's really why it's a good idea to have benchers, to have birchonim that have the English translation, because if you read some of the translations of the Zemiros, some of them are quite beautiful. Most of them have to do with Shabbos. Not all of them. It's very interesting. Some of them just have to do with praising God in general. But most of the Zemiros have to do with Shabbos. And I was noticing there's one Zemer that we say on Shabbos day called Yom Zeh Mechubad, which many of you know. And you notice this in a very interesting progression. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stanzas in Yom Zeh Mechubad. And the way to remember the order to say it, it's an acrostic. Yom Zeh Mechubad spells out the word Yisrael and the letter Hey for Hashem. So, but what's interesting, it's actually, it's the Yom, the Yud is the refrain, and then you have the 5 stanzas, Shin, Reish, Aleph, Lamed, and Hey. So anyway, Sheishes Yomim Ta'aseh Melachtecha. 6 days do your work. V'Yom HaShvi Le'Elokecha. On the 7th day is for God. Shabbos Lo Sasa Vo Melacha Kivo Kicholasa Sheishes Yomim. Don't do any work on Shabbos because God did all the work during the 6 days. Then Rishon Hula Mikroi Kodesh Yom Shabbos and Yom Shabbos Kodesh. That it is the first holy day that is mentioned in the Torah. Al Kain Kol Ish B'Yenu Yekadesh Al Shtei Lechem Yivtzu Sumimim. And therefore each person should make Kiddush on wine, and on 2 loaves of bread, pure people make Hamotzi. That's the second stanza. The third stanza, Echol Mashmanim Shesei Mamtakim Ki Kel Yitein L'chol Bo Devekim. That eat fatted foods, really, really good quality foods, drink sweet, delicious drinks. Ki Kel Yitein L'chol Bo Devekim, because God will give you so much for those who adhere to this regimen. Beged Lilbosh V'lechem Chukim Basar V'dagim V'chol Mat'amim. God will provide you with clothes to wear and your daily bread and meat and fish and all good fine foods. If you commit yourself to observe Shabbos with those wonderful foods, God will take care of you. And then the next stanza number 4. Lo techsar kol bo v'achalta, v'savata uveirachta. You'll lack for nothing. You'll eat, you'll be satisfied, you'll bench. Es Hashem Elokecha asher ahavta, you'll bench or you'll give grace to the God that you love. Ki veirachecha mikol ha'amim, because He has blessed you among all other nations. So this is the progression of Shabbos. Now, after we've talked about what you're supposed to do on Shabbos, make kiddush, make hamotzi, have fine foods. God will bless you if you do all of these things. Finally, we get to the final stanza, which is the Hey, which seems to be totally disjointed when you look at the words. Hashamayim misaprim kevodo, the heavens speak of God's glory. V'gam haaretz malachazdo, and the earth is filled with God's kindness. Ru'u ki chol eile asasayado, behold how He has made all of this. Ki hu hatzur pa'alo samim, because after all He is the rock whose works are complete and 100% pure. Now, what is the connection to Shabbos observance and the last stanza? Hashamayim misaprim kevodo v'gam haaretz malachazda. The heavens relate God's glory, and the earth is filled with His kindness. What does it have to do with Shabbos observance? So I think it's exactly what we're saying. You know, this is a progression. A Jew has made Kiddush, he's made Hamotzi, he's observed the Shabbos. And then, after he's eaten, he's been sated and he benches, that's when he goes out for his walk after the meal, because of course, on a full stomach of cholent, who can even fall asleep? So he goes out to walk on a beautiful, warm day in the middle of February or March in Florida. And he's going for his Shabbos walk. And he looks up. Because he's observed Shabbos and he's made Kiddush and he's made Hamotzi and he's sung his Zemiros and he's benched, he can actually see Hashem in the heavens and he can see Hashem in the earth. He can see Hashem everywhere. That's what I think the liturgist is trying to communicate to us. He's saying if you want to find Hashem in the universe, that can never be your starting point. Your starting point, it has to be observe Shabbos. The actions of Shabbos themselves will strengthen your emunah so that you'll be able to find God everywhere. You'll be wearing a new set of spectacles, and you'll be able to find Hashem wherever you go through your observance of Shabbos. You won't be able to start the Zemer with Hashemayim Misaprim Kavoda, because if you walk outside without Shabbos observance, you won't find God in the heavens, you won't find God in the earth. But once you've observed Shabbos, then Hashemayim Misaprim Kavodo, the Gam Haaretz Malachazdo, then you'll be able to find Hashem everywhere. It's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is trying to communicate to us. And that's why we believe that engaging our physical sides in the mitzvahs themselves, especially when it comes to Shabbos, all of these things are much more effective in strengthening our faith than asceticism, sensory withdrawal, which was, by the way, remember those sensory deprivation tanks in the 70s? And they were supposed to bring you to this heightened awareness. And does anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That was a big thing back then, right? In the 70s, 60s and 70s, the sensory they would put you into a tank and they would close it up and you'd have to spend like a whole, hours and hours in there. And then apparently you'd be able to develop some kind of altered state through that. And there was a whole book they wrote, the novel that was written about it. Anyway, so that's just the opposite of what our belief is. Engage in the physical world with consciousness, with awareness, and with purpose, and perform those mitzvahs that Hashem has prescribed, and that will get the mind focused on the things that it's supposed to be focused on. Okay. And then next week we'll go back. We're going to change topics completely, and we're going to go back to our discussion of Israel being the heart of mankind, and through the source of God's glorification. So we've finished, now we're leaving Shabbos aside and we're going to go to the next topic.